So we're going to begin by talking about Vincent van Gogh. So Van Gogh is this rather tragic figure in art history. He struggles all throughout his life with depression, and he's got a lot of turmoil in his life, going back to all the way when he was an early child. So he's actually the second Vincent van Gogh. There was a prior Vincent van Gogh that was born but died as an infant. And they buried him on their property. And Van Gogh talks about the kind of stories of his mother taking him by his hand as a toddler to the gravesite of his brother and seeing his own name across the gravestone. And that already starts him off on this very, sad and kind of difficult path in life. His brother Theo was born a few years later, so Theo is the younger of the two brothers. And Theo actually becomes a very prominent part of his life. He ends up supporting him financially. He's the biggest proponent of him as an artist. He's a champion of his work, and he spends most of his life trying to sell his older brother's work. Now, Van Gogh never sells a work in his own lifetime, and that also weighs heavily on him. Prior to becoming an artist, Van Gogh tried his hand at lots of different careers. At one point, he tried to be a bookkeeper. He spent a great amount of time trying to become a preacher and a minister, but he was unable to secure a position because he was deemed too radical and too strict in his interpretation of religion. Later in life, Van Gogh is going to question all of his religious faith and all of his religious beliefs, including the belief in God. He struggles with these beliefs as well. So when he eventually becomes an artist and decides that's going to be his path, he leaves the Netherlands and moves to France in order to study with some of the greatest painters in the world. Now, he's often mocked and he's often kind of seen as an outcast, although he shows with the Impressionists and has works next to the Impressionists. He's always considered kind of like the other person at the table. He's never really brought into the group. They never call him an Impressionist. He's never brought in to the movement itself. And he struggles his whole life. The story goes and the myth goes that Theo was trying to sell some of his works towards the end of Van Gogh's life, and he finally does. But the real sad part about this is that Van Gogh never knows this. He never realizes that his older brother stole his work, because what had happened was Van Gogh either was shot or shot himself. There's some controversy here. But he was shot in the stomach, and it took him 3 days to die. So he's stuck up in this bed, and he's bleeding out and dying. And in this process, Theo is actually taking a train to come visit him to tell him the good news. He had sold one of his first works. But unfortunately, by the time Theo gets there, Vincent has already passed away. So in this kind of like tragedy, he doesn't even know that he sold his last work. So this is Vincent van Gogh's life. Van Gogh didn't sell a painting until his deathbed. So, he's a much different figure in history. But Starry Night is this beautiful painting, and it's highly valued. It's one of the most valued paintings in the world. It's worth over $100 million. So just like the other painting, just the Mona Lisa, you could ask this question: why is Starry Night so important? Right? So we can do a little bit of investigating into the painting itself. All right. So we start with description, just like we did with the last one. So you describe what you see. So you describe the colors that Van Gogh has here, right? These really vibrant blues contrasted with these vibrant yellows. This figure in the foreground here, a lot of times students will say, oh, is that a tassel or something else? It's actually a poplar tree. It's a tree that symbolizes death in Greek and Roman mythology and throughout literature, right? So it's actually a tree that's been, it's kind of this dead, gnarled tree. And then underneath it is this townscape, right? So there's all these little village, and there's a big giant steeple where the church was. And so these are the things that we can understand about the painting itself. We describe it for what we see exactly. Then we analyze the choices that Van Gogh made. This actually isn't the only Starry Night Van Gogh painted. He painted several different scenes at night with these really vibrant yellow stars. And these really blue, kind of swirly colors that are really like crudely applied. So the choices Van Gogh's making here are, unlike Da Vinci, he's not going for naturalism or for like a realistic sort of portrayal. He's doing this impressionistic idea of trying to capture the way light and color play together, right? And so he's got these really, really, soothing kind of swirls that move across the page. this contrast of darks and lights. He's embedded contrasting colors, right? So blue and orange are contrasts. So yellow certainly kind of fills in with the blue, and you have these really nice kind of rhythmic and harmonious strokes that take you from the left side all the way to the right side. And then he's used a little bit of perspective here and positioned the town below the viewer's viewpoint. All right, so these are the choices that Van Gogh has made. All right, now to interpret. So some of the backstory about Van Gogh is that he struggled with mental health. And this painting was actually done from his window in an asylum that he checked himself into. He checked himself into the asylum because he was suffering delusions and he was suffering from nightmares. And he struggled with his mental health his whole life. We possibly think that he may have suffered from something like schizophrenia or possibly bipolarism, right? So kind of like this reverse or this kind of diagnosis from today's kind of tools from the past. So we wonder the struggles that Van Gogh went. We also know that he was dosing himself with lithium, if not by himself, but also under the care of doctors. He was probably an alcoholic because what we do know is that he imbibed in alcohol a lot. So some have speculated that the reason these stars are so vibrant and popping across the page in both of his Starry Nights is that because that is actually how he saw the world. People who have taken large doses of lithium tend to see the lights in really vibrant ways. We know so much about Van Gogh, and perhaps more so about Van Gogh than maybe any other artist in the world, is because we have copious letters. Van Gogh wrote his brother almost every single day. And so we have all these really fantastic letters that kind of document and give us a Van Gogh biography. His brother was an art dealer and did his best to try to sell Van Gogh's work, but he was actually very unsuccessful. And it wasn't until the day that Van Gogh died that his brother was able to sell one of his paintings. So Van Gogh has this really turbulent life, right? And he also struggled with religion. He took a stab at being a preacher for a while, but because he was so absolute and had such absolutism in his methodology for being a minister, he was actually kicked out of the church. So yes, he's got this kind of like deep background. Another problem that Van Gogh has is his friend Gauguin. So you've probably heard that Van Gogh cut off his own ear, right? And some have said that this was a fit of rage, and that he was having delusions. That's possible, and that's typically the story that we hear. But there is one other theory that isn't really mainstream, but it's nice controversial speculation. That it involved his friend Gauguin. Okay, so Gauguin is another painter. Gauguin and Van Gogh both are showing their work with other impressionists like Monet, Degas, Renoir, Mary Cassatt, right? So these some of the most famous painters in the world, right? And so Van Gogh and Gauguin are showing with them. They're actually categorized as post-impressionists because they weren't really in the club, so to speak. But in any event, they're showing. And Gauguin kind of has like a seedy backstory. So Gauguin was actually a very wealthy banker, and he had a family, numerous children, and he ended up leaving his wife, his children, and his occupation in order to pursue a life of painting. But more so, he also traveled to Polynesia, where he took a very young bride. She was perhaps 13 or 14 years old. Passed on syphilis to her, and then abandoned her as well, right? So Gauguin has this kind of like really dark past. He was friends with Van Gogh and was supporting Van Gogh for a long time. So Van Gogh was living off of Gauguin's wealth. But it seems that Gauguin was very abusive, at least from Van Gogh's standpoint. What we know of Gauguin, we hear from Van Gogh's letters to his brother. So there is a story that Van Gogh didn't cut his own ear off, but that one night, in kind of a drunken argument between Gauguin and Van Gogh, things escalated, and Gauguin actually cut off Van Gogh's ear, either fencing or with a knife, and that Van Gogh actually was covering for Gauguin in that process, and perhaps because of that abusive relationship. So just like with Da Vinci, now knowing Van Gogh's story, we may have a whole new take on Starry Night. A lot of times people interpret Starry Night as this kind of whimsical and soothing and kind of lovely painting, but it could also be interpreted with a lot of this like turbulence and internal struggles and this dark colors, this poplar tree in the front foreground here, which represents death, and the church steeple kind of piercing the sky, kind of representing Van Gogh's issues with religion. And so there's lots of ways to look at this painting from a personal standpoint, also from Van Gogh's point of view. And the last thing you do is you judge it, right? So you judge it for its ability to communicate ideas and its successfulness in terms of the artist using visual communication to speak to the viewer.